Hey guys, it's Courtney and I'm here with another Simon Hurley Create video. Today I'm going to be using the Brilliant Baubles, I believe you pronounce it. I call them ornaments, but I'm going to be using this stamp set to create three very simple cards. So I'm starting off with some Bristol Smooth cardstock and I'm using my mini Misty here and lining up just as many as I can fit on the panel. It doesn't really matter placement. And then I am going to treat my panel with my anti-static tool because we're going to be doing some heat embossing, and then stamp these out with my Versamark ink. Now my Versamark ink is very dirty, and if you've watched a couple videos ago, you'll see why. I believe it was the last Simon Hurley video, honestly, but that is why you can kind of see the impression more than you normally would. It's not necessarily clear ink anymore. But once that is stamped out, I can sprinkle on some gold embossing powder, and this is the gold embossing powder by Ranger, and I just use a coffee filter there to kind of catch any excess, and that way I can just pour it right back in the jar. Now, I don't know whether you guys can see, but this one on the top left, I have like a streaky line there. It is because I have a cat hair that is on the stamp that I didn't realize it. So I'm just taking this little pick. You can use a craft pick. You can use anything. This is just one of the Cricut ones to kind of loosen up the embossing powder. And I find for tiny areas like this works better than a paintbrush because then you don't kind of accidentally smear the rest of it that you want to stay there. That makes sense. So I let my heat gun heat up for about 30 seconds or so before bringing that to my paper, and then I can go ahead and heat set these. And I love to watch embossing powder melt, especially metallics. It's hard to see on camera, but the good thing about the metallics is that you can actually see exactly where is already melted. Sometimes it can be a little tricky with clear or white. It may not be totally heated, but it looks like it is. So I went ahead and created two more just like this. I kind of just mixed up the ornaments that I used, but and there's the culprit right there, that little tiny cat hair. So I'm going to take two more panels, kind of mix up the ornaments that I'm using, but I did the same thing, just making sure that I treat the panel first with an anti-static tool, stamped with Versamark ink, sprinkled on the gold embossing powder, and then heat set all of those. Now we're going to add some color to these ornaments, and we're going to do this the easiest possible way there is. So I'm going to be using a variety of the Simon Hurley Create dye inks, and I'm going to be creating some kind of messy watercolor backgrounds with these, and I'm going to be using 3 different color combinations. And I typically would be using my glass media mat for this, but I can't seem to master not getting a glare on it when I'm recording or filming, so I'm just using this laminated sheet of paper. So I'm going to smush out, and I'm just using the side of my ink pad, just kind of smush that out on my surface. And then I'm going to take my little mister bottle here and spray some water. I'm not drenching it, but just enough for it to kind of bead up, and then lay my panel flat down onto it. Then I can kind of lift it up, see where I need a little bit more color. I really don't care about the background. I just want to make sure that I have all of the ornaments covered. There's no white space in the ornaments. And this will just clean up because, especially because it's wet and it's a water reactive ink, I can just wipe this up with a paper towel and it comes clean. Next, I'll move on to the next panel, and I'm going to use a different combination for this one, but these are blues, and I mixed in a purple there just to have a little bit of contrast, but I'm doing the same thing. You can see I'm just adding a little bit of ink so that way I don't contaminate my ink pads, not that you really would if you're using colors that are this similar, and spritzing that with some water, and again, just laying that flat down onto that surface. You can see you get really pretty results. I loved this color combination. So once again, I am just going to wipe this up with my paper towel and move on to the third and final combination. And this, I used 2 different reds. One is like a really deep red, and one's just kind of a regular red. And I mixed in a yellow in here, which is more of a golden yellow, but I thought this would give, like I said, variation instead of having just all reds. If you mixed all reds in, it's just going to look red. So you have to bring in that one color that's just a little bit different. So once again, going to spritz that, lay my panel flat down onto that surface and kind of just pick up any excess ink that I need to. Now this is Bristol Smooth, so it dries pretty quick and I did not drench it. I didn't add a whole lot of water. So this took maybe 10 minutes to dry before moving on to the next step. It really didn't take that long at all. And you can do tons of these. So next, once my panels were dry, I'm going to fussy cut these out. Now, if you have a scan and cut, you can use a scan and cut if you don't like fussy cutting, but these are really, really simple to cut. I just left a little bit of a border on the edge of each one of these. I think it took me maybe a total of 5 minutes to cut all of these ornaments out. Now, like I said, we are going to create 3 different cards, and I really honestly didn't have any idea what I was going to do, but earlier today it occurred to me that I have like 2 Christmas cards made, and we are mid-September now, and I typically send out about 150 Christmas cards. So I got to get my butt moving. So we're going to mass produce some, and this is a really easy way to do so. So first I have 3 different panels of white cardstock here, and these are all cut to 5 1/4 by 4. So just 1/4 of an inch smaller than an A2 size card. And for this first one, I'm just going to take 4 of the images and kind of just plop them down. Now, if I were to do this again, I probably would pop these up with some foam tape just to add a little bit of extra interest to it. It was a little plain, but like I said, 150 Christmas cards this year. Some of them are going to be mass produced. Some of them are going to be a little bit more plain than others. So I ended up using my Tombow Mono Multi Glue to adhere these down. And the benefit of using the wet glue rather than foam tape is that you do have a couple of seconds to kind of shift things around and move them where they need to go before the glue dries. So I'm going to go ahead and put that panel aside. We're going to move on to the next one, and I am just going to fill in the entire background. I don't care if they're hanging off the edges or off the corners. I'm going to snip those off anyway, but I just want to pretty much fill in the entire background with these. And I had to kind of play around a little bit to make sure everything fit because they are different shapes and enough so that you can see at least what they are, even though some of it will be cut off. And what I like to do when I'm arranging many, many images like this, I like to kind of keep them in place. It's okay to glue like the first one down. I just picked that up and glued that down, but I kind of just pick up the corner a little bit, add a little bit of glue underneath that, and that way it's going to stay exactly where it is. Give that a couple of seconds while I move on to the next one and do the same thing. By the time I go back and glue the rest of it down, that glue has already set. So that image is not going to shift around. It's going to stay exactly where I need it to stay. And the Tombow Mono Multi Glue does dry pretty quickly. I would say that it becomes permanent within about 15 seconds or so you don't have to wait too long. So once all of my images were glued down and I picked up all of those little corners that I had missed the first time around, I can trim off the excess. Now you can flip this over and use your scissors, but I only have little tiny scissors. I don't have those big shears that I really should add to my craft room, but I haven't yet. So I'm just going to bring out my paper trimmer, and this card panel is already cut. I already know the measurements of it, so I can just kind of use the lines within my paper trimmer to make sure that it does remain flat. I don't know why my camera is shaking so much. I must have had something set up differently than I normally do, so I apologize for that. But once that's done, like I said, I put that aside to dry with the other one, and then I have this extra ornament left over. I was only going to create 2 cards, but I have this extra ornament, so why not make a card with it? Now, part of the stamp set, we have this little string. I kind of messed this one up, but you can kind of at least get the idea. It has this little string with a ribbon on the bottom of it where it would be holding the ornament. So I'm just going to stamp this down onto my panel. And once again, I am going to heat emboss this with the same gold embossing powder. Everything is going to be gold for these. So once again, stamp that with my Versamark ink. Now I didn't get a great impression. And because my ink pad is so dirty, I can actually see the impression. So I'm just going to take an emboss it pen and just fill in that little area that I didn't really stamp that well. And then I can sprinkle on that embossing powder and heat set that. Now, when I lined up my little ornament, I had lost the ribbon, or you couldn't really tell where, not the ribbon, the bow. You couldn't really tell where it was. So I ended up trimming off this top portion of the ornament, and I really wish I wouldn't have done that. I should have just covered up the bow, which I ended up doing anyway, but I did glue that down with my Tombow Mono multi glue once again, and then put that aside to dry, and we can work on these sentiments. Now for this first panel, I ended up just stamping out my sentiment right in the center with one of the inks that I used, and this is Tropical Tango, I believe it's called, but I'll link all of the colors below. And I just stamped that right there in the center. Next, I can move on to the second panel. And for this one, I didn't really have a whole lot of room to stamp a sentiment, so I decided to create not really a sentiment strip. I guess you could call it a strip, but it's going to go all the way across the card. So I trimmed a piece of some scrap white cardstock that I have, and I trimmed it, I don't know, maybe about 3/4 of an inch wide and the length of the card panel. Once again, treated that with my anti-static tool, stamped that out with the Versamark ink, and once again, I am going to be using that same gold embossing powder that I've been using for everything. Went ahead and heat set that, and I figured this one would look better popped up, so I ended up using some foam tape for this one. Kind of played with the placement because once again, even though the ornaments are kind of cut off, I still want people to know, or the recipient to know, that they are ornaments. So I didn't want to cover up too much. So just popped up that sentiment with some foam tape. And for the third and final panel, I am just going to heat emboss a sentiment right there on the side of the ornament. It's going to be super clean and simple, but it's kind of like a bonus card. It wasn't planned to begin with. So you guys probably know by now that I like to mat my panels, especially simple panels, onto a colored cardstock just to make them pop off the page. Well, using black cardstock, which is what I normally do, is not really going to go well with this, so I'm going to use the embossing powder. And here I'm just showing you that you can use one of those emboss it pens, but I don't have the patience for that by doing 3 of them. So I'm going to take some panels here, and this is just white cardstock as well. Now this is cut a little bit larger than my card panel, but smaller than a card base. So it's about 1/8 of an inch smaller than a card base, an A2 size card base. And I'm just smushing my ink pad across the sides of it. I don't care about the center. I don't care if it's messy. I don't care if I have fingerprints. I didn't treat it with my anti-static tool because you're only going to see a tiny bit of this. So I covered that with the embossing powder and heat set that. Now you do want to make sure that you have your heat gun heated up for sure, because you're heating up the entire panel and you just want to minimize the amount of warping that you're going to get. So I did this with the other 3, and they are cut to the same size, use the same embossing powder, same smushing technique and all of that. And then I can finally assemble my cards, my very, very simple cards. So for all of them, I'm going to use, again, my Tombow Mono multi glue to adhere these down to these gold panels. You're only going to see a tiny bit of it, but I have some warping. I have some warping on one of these on both of the panels. So this heat, wow, can I talk today? The sentiment was heat embossed on this one, plus the background was heat embossed. So I have some warping. You may have to add a little bit of pressure, something heavy to it, just to make sure that it really sticks down. But the other ones, I really didn't have too much of an issue, especially in the center, because there is no embossing powder there. So it's just paper to paper, and that tends to stick or adhere a little bit differently, or a little bit quicker, I should say. So once all of my panels were glued down to my gold panels, then I could adhere these down to the card bases. So for the first 2, these are, I don't want to say these are not as simple, because they are just as simple, but they have a little bit more going on, I guess you could say. So I'm just going to adhere these flat down to my card bases. That way I have a little bit of that gold border as well as a little bit of a white border. And for this super simple one, I am going to use some fun foam for this one, just to add a little bit of something to it. And you can see that I'm adding a whole lot of glue to the back of it, because it kind of seeps into that foam. And then I just place my MISTI on top of it, because it will take a little bit of time for that glue to set on that fun foam. And I'm going to finish off with some stickles, because it's the only gold thing that I had. I didn't have any gold Nuvo drops. I could have sworn I did, but I don't know where they are. So I just kind of added those to just 2 of the cards, and then put my hand in one. which is typical of me. So the good thing about the stickles rather than the Nouveau drops or the enamel accents is that it doesn't leave behind color. It just leaves behind the glitter. So I can easily just wipe it off with my finger while it's still wet and add another drop, and you'll never know that there was ever a mistake there. So that is it. That is the cards for today. Super, super simple. As always, I will leave the supplies listed in the description box below. Thanks so much for stopping by today and have a great day. Bye.